All politics is identity politics. Hey everybody, this is Kevin DeAnna. Welcome to a special episode of Identity Politics. My guest today is Thomas Rousseau, the leader and founder of Patriot Front, the most exciting nationalist group operating today. So, thank you for coming here, man. I know
Thanks
it's a big thing.
Me.
We've both been doing this for a long time. We've seen the movement go through an awful lot of stuff. I, being 100 years old, and still remember like the alt-right and everything that kind of came out of that. Right. And so there have been a lot of times in the past where something is going, people get really excited, maybe they're getting involved for the first time, and they feel like they're just going to sweep everything all before them. Mm-hmm. And then usually there's some catastrophe, and then you have to start all over again.
Right.
How do we prevent ourselves from just having to start from ground zero every single time, every 2 years or so? Because it seems like that's the pattern we're stuck in.
Well, I'd say that, of course, I have my personal bias in all these matters, and I'm very much, loath to hide it. But Patriot Front has been constant and on an upward trajectory since 2017. Because we've seen these groups come and go, and I've seen a lot of different tactics that they've tried to employ. They've had plenty of different branding, and there's always been some kind of leadership issue, some kind of money issue. Money is one of it for a lot of them. And, you were already well into politics by the time of Charlottesville. I was straight out of high school, teenager, very much in my formative years. And I was involved, but I was not so involved that I wasn't extremely adaptable. So I was able to witness everything that happened with the downfall of about 3 or 4 different organizations simultaneously in the months immediately following Charlottesville. And I took those lessons. I took the lessons about how to handle money, how to handle civil litigation, how to handle leadership and cults of personality, which are very fragile, especially in an online basis, and how to plan activism. And I think, Patriot Front is something of a refutation of Charlottesville in a sense. Not the ideas of the rally, which I believe were very well founded, of course, but the strategy on play. Because a lot of people came out of that event and they said, you can't do demonstrations anymore.
Right.
America is dead. There's nothing, you can't be a nationalist. There's nothing to protect and preserve anymore. And also you can't do demonstrations. We either have to only vote GOP and infiltrate the GOP, or we have to blow things up. And both of those are equally stupid if you try them in isolation. You should never blow things up, just for the record, in case anybody was curious about where I stand on that. But, we came out of it that you need to practice politics and organizing. You need to engage with the public space, but you need to do it smarter and better. And you're going to have to step on some toes and, break a few or mess with a few sacred cows of, the movement space in order to do that and make the reforms that are necessary. And I think, if I've done one thing in PF over the last 8 years, I think it would be that I've heavily reformed a good section of the kind of activist culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 big things that you brought up there that I think are important because people argue about them all the time. One, what is the value of these sorts of street demonstrations? Mm-hmm. Like, what is expected to be gained? And then the second one, I think, and you hinted at it there, but it's something that certainly I changed my mind on from when I started, which is the idea of being essentially post-American. Mm-hmm. Like, the system is so totally broken and so anti-white that we have to stop thinking of ourselves as Americans and start thinking as white people. But then, of course, when you go to ordinary white Americans, they look at you like, what in God's name are you talking about? Like, obviously, I'm American.
Right. So, when it comes to demonstrations, and again, people still don't understand this, but obviously PF is so much bigger and so much more organized than we were previously, and a lot of that is due to the demonstrations. And, people will say, oh, well, I love it when y'all are doing book clubs or, literature readings or disaster relief or training, or you're doing these seminars. I love all that stuff and the hikes and the family events, but I just don't like the demonstrations. It's like, where do you think I got those guys?
Yeah, right.
I love swimming, but I hate getting wet. That's an integral tactic in accumulating these people. It's like, why don't you just get a ton of followers on social media? Well, I can't. Because we're censored.
And you're just going to get banned, too.
Absolutely, but you can't censor a march. You can't censor a march in the same way that you can censor, a bunch of TikTok or Twitter accounts. So, it's obviously successful in the way that we do it. And then there's the matter of people don't understand association. That, that you hear it, oh, Rico, that you're going to, if you have any group of people doing something, all it takes is one bad person to do something stupid, and then everybody's going to maximum security prison for the rest of their lives, which isn't actually how it works, especially with RICO specifically. It's thrown around as a big boogeyman, and I'm sure the feds kind of like it that way. Not that I'm saying Fed jacketers are feds, some of them are, but anyways. And I think, that's a big boogeyman, and people don't understand that you need at some point in this whole thing, you're gonna need to start working with other people.
Yeah.
There's sovereignty, and there's having our own republic again, and we're not going to get there without some kind of middle ground space of a bunch of Twitter anons to sovereignty, without people working together. And even if you're a podcaster, even if you run a show, even if you sell T-shirts or you do anything, you are associated with people,
right?
And you're gonna have to figure out how to associate with people at some point. Better do it now. It's like people that wait for the apocalypse. They wait for this great, calamity, and then I'm going to,
Yeah, you got to have that in advance. I mean,
Yeah.
when the thing hits, if you don't have the organization, you're just going to get stumped.
No, absolutely. And I mean, at some point, everybody agrees that you're going to need a brotherhood and regimentation and organization. But our stance on the matter, our opinion, is that it's better to have it now, because it's a lot more useful now than in the hypothetical sense. So that in marches, right? They do so much. We could do a whole podcast just on marches, but they do so much for the morale. They do so much for the planning capabilities of the men, and they attract so many people. And they don't need to change they don't need to change congressional legislation. They just need to be worth doing, and in that sense, they are. And then the other matter of being post-American. I've always been something of a patriot, right? I grew up obviously in Texas, very conservative area. I was a Boy Scout, so and I always liked history early on. I remember, growing up watching a lot of documentaries, but when the History Channel still had documentaries.
Yeah, right.
Like that.
Dating yourself here.
Yeah. When Hitler was an alien and the pyramids were made by, whatever.
That's how I got involved.
Yeah. But, so I never had this, this disdain for America, but I feel like a lot of people, in their youth, they were largely poisoned against it. And I don't want to analyze people, but I feel like a lot of them, they saw how bad conservatism was, like the Rush Limbaugh, Newt Gingrich conservatism.
Right.
And they heard those conservatives talk about America, the white picket fences and the kind of post-19 Reagan era, and they essentially disagreed with them about everything, except for when they were talking about America and America's traditions and history. And when they said, and when liberals of today say, America's a melting pot, tons of, immigrants, and it's actually about everybody gets liberty to do whatever they want, a lot of these folks, especially the really radical ones, they disagree with these people on everything except their opinions on America, which
Right.
I find to be a little strange. So I didn't have that kind of reaction. I had an inherent skepticism, and I came out of this a little bit more apolitical, with a baseline affection towards my heritage.
But where does this fit with, you talked about these conservatives, and I think a lot of people, certainly for people my age or so, like older millennials,
Right.
the George W. Bush era basically pushed away an entire generation
Oh, yeah.
of people from the right. And so much of the early alt-right, the proto-alt-right, whatever, was basically just a reaction of total disgust to the conservatism at the time. But, and some people will say this about Trump, that it sort of de-radicalized a lot of people, got people back involved in mainstream politics. I would say that's certainly true of me and a lot of other people. How do we get to where we're getting dealing with the normie conservatives? Because on the one level, they are closer to our position in some ways. There are a lot of people who have been won over into the movement from those ranks. On the other hand, they're in some ways the biggest enemy.
Right. They're certainly an impediment in the sense of lacking agreement and lacking ability to change on things. And they control a lot of institutions, especially now the conservative culture is quite ascendant.
Yeah.
But I would say that there is something that needs to be said about conservatives becoming nationalists, in the sense that, leftists and liberals usually don't as frequently.
Yeah.
I look around the organization, and there's way more people who were conservative at some point during their political evolution than who were socialists or liberals or whatever. Because in order to be on the left in the modern American context, one of the core pillars is being anti-white,
right.
is being anti-national, that you can't have the conception of a nation that is based in anything. Conservatives, at least, still wrong, at least still think that it's based in a common culture that you have to assimilate to in a lot of cases, which then it's an easier jump, again, still a jump, but it's an easier jump to say that you have to assume that culture can only be assimilated to by certain people, or at least that foundational culture is derived from a certain group of people, that being us. So you need to be open-minded. I think your movement, your path, your cause needs to have a pathway of salvation for a lot of people, because we can't win with the people we have right now. It's not enough. They're not good enough, the people we have. None of us are good enough. We all need to be better in service to the cause. But we need to attract new people, and we need to have a reasonable degree of, a sober understanding that people are going to change, and none of this works if we believe that people don't change.
No,
right?
certainly not.
So, we need to be open-armed but yet persistent. I think Patriot Front does a really good job, that we have been utterly consistent in all of our beliefs for the entirety of our existence. We haven't changed any principles. I don't do flip-flopping. I've been the same on all the core issues. Maybe my interpretation of certain current events has altered at some point during my entire life, but whose hasn't? But, we've been constant on our associations. We've always been the same on our racial qualifications for being a member of the organization. We've always been the same on foreign policy. We've always been the same on our social standings about how a man should live in his personal life. We've been very consistent about all those things. And I think it's important that you have rigorous outreach, but you don't compromise, because you need to always be looking at the other spaces. We can get into these spaces, right? A lot of people say, just infiltrate the GOP, just do that. But it doesn't work if you're alone. It doesn't work if you're just sending somebody into politics. And this goes with a company. This goes with any type of institution. It doesn't work if you just send somebody in alone. They need to have a greater loyalty to something outside of that institution in order to effectively get in and change it. Right? That's how the left did it. They weren't doing it alone. They were doing it as members of groups and NGOs and projects and things like that. So it can be done. And even conventional politics, I've come to reason that, because I remember back in 2017 in the Charlottesville era, when everything was calamity, one of the big things people were saying was there's no political solution. And I don't believe the solution is purely political, but politics plays a part in the solution. And a lot of people said a lot of things were impossible that I've already done. Right. So
what would you say the biggest one is?
Mass public assemblies, having a membership organization.
Saying that was done. Yeah.
Yeah. Having a membership organization, at all that survives, you're just going to get sued and that's going to destroy it. Happened 3 times. Hasn't happened yet. You're just going to get doxxed. We've survived all that, right? And whenever somebody does get doxxed, if they stick with us and we work with them, then they end up better off than they were before.
Right. At this point, we've all kind of been doxxed. It just sort of comes with the territory. But there is a broader thing here, which is that, is there a danger that you just sort of end up becoming the right wing of the Republican Party or the conservative movement, because people will say, well, we need to be beyond left and right and everything else. And I think that doesn't really work for various reasons. But the most important being what you said. Left and right is basically defined in the modern American context as anti-white, and if not pro-white, at least we don't hate whites.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, co-option is a real thing, because what happens if you just become the foot soldiers of the GOP? No,
I totally agree. And that's why, I have never endorsed Trump. I've never told people to vote for him, and I've never, come out and called myself a conservative, and I don't think I ever will. And also, I think a lot of the mechanisms for co-opting, a lot of the mechanisms for subverting or manipulating, it's usually commercialization is what I've found. Right. And especially since, I've talked about this a little recently, it's an interesting phenomenon, especially since X has opened up. They really turned down the censorship dial a lot. They moved the Overton window a lot to the right. It's still outside of PF, but it used to be a mile ahead. Now it's at our noses, right?
Right.
We're still on the outside of it, though. But a lot of these things, they realize that, this politics is really, the far right, whether it's the Groyper sphere or whatever. This is really popular, right? The Agartha edits, all that kind of stuff. And it's silly, but they're taking, and I don't think there's how much of it is intentional.
You could say it's silly. That's why I think these things all day.
But there's there is an element of, okay, we're going to pick, kind of the most commercially palpable options of this, and we're going to let that through, and we're going to make sure, and you can make a living, off of being a far right kind of racist streamer as long as you've got black friends. You can have a big company as long as you're kind of, and you can dislike the Jews or whatever, as long as you're not, in a group about doing it, right?
Yeah, as long as there's a wink and a nod, a level of irony about the whole thing.
I think that's a huge thing. And I have never taken public donations, at large. And I have never marketed products I mean, I think Above Time Coffee, we put them in.
Yeah, right.
That's coffee beans, right? But I don't run ads. I don't have a donor class. The organization has always been 99% plus insider funded. Not insider as in terms of members, right? People show up and they give anywhere between $15 to $30 for an action. How do you fund all that? How do you fund all that? People give some cash when they show up, right? And I'm unable to be bought. I'm not somebody who wants a lot of money. I wouldn't have gotten into this if I did. And I think it's important that you value virtue more. I think it was a Ben Franklin quote. He said, "Never change virtue for wealth or liberty for power."
Well,
and I took that literally.
When they accuse people of being grifters, it's like, man, if you're picking this as your business to be a grifter, you picked the wrong business.
And a few million
there are a lot easier ways to make money. Where do you stand on Trump? Because at this point, we've basically been in the era of Trump for like a decade. And I don't think there's been like a week where I haven't thought about the guy at least once, for all this time. And on one level, I don't think we would be here. I don't think the movement would be here had he not come down the escalator. But on the other hand, everybody is very frustrated. Everybody's saying he's not doing enough. And yet, when you look at what the prospects are if the left returns to power, I mean, at that point, you're dealing with full scale, we're wiped out of everything, including social media.
I think it is an unreasonable position to say that Trump hasn't done anything which a nationalist could point to and say, that's good. I'm glad about that. You said something really impactful, which I hadn't even realized, which was, it was on one of your recent shows. Did some listening. And you said that, remember when people were saying that you can't close the border. It's impossible. You can't do that. You're never going to stop illegal immigrant caravans from coming through the border. It would take $100 trillion and it would bankrupt the entire country. And then Trump gets into office and that just happened. I mean, maybe it's all a big cover-up. I don't know. But if you believe the story, which seems plausible, that it just happened and it wasn't a big deal, didn't require any great act of Congress, didn't require any crazy military buildup.
No amnesty.
Turns out you could have just done it the whole time.
Right.
They said it was impossible. Turns out you can just do it, which is a moment I love in politics when something which was told to be impossible actually turns out to be extremely reasonable, like I mentioned earlier. And there are some good things. Obviously, it's not good enough. I said in a speech not too long ago that, the kind of the big thing about how we view these things is not enough. It's not enough, and it will never be enough until nationalists are in charge of the direction of this country and the destiny of our people, right? That's my opinion. But I'm able to, I feel like if you, George Washington's farewell address, he said this in terms of foreign relations, but it's a good general principle to have, that if you are habitually positive or habitually negative about something, like a foreign people or some other movement or entity, you are enslaved to it. Right. That if you have to be anti-Trump about everything he does, then no matter what he does, he's choosing what your position is inadvertently. Yeah. Right. And if you have to be in the same way, if you have to be positive about everything he does, then you're enslaved to it, and you are purely reactive in either case, and you're just responding to something outside of you. And I think a lot of people exist too much on social media. I know I sound like I'm as old as you are when I say that, but
I'm so old I don't even take offense to that anymore.
A lot of people exist too much on social media where they, and they get into this attention economy where they have to have an opinion on every little thing that comes up, and they have to have it immediately. They have to have it before the next guy, and it has to be more novel. It has to be a hotter take. But
it has to be contrarian, because otherwise the reporters won't pay attention to us.
You don't want to agree with other people, right?
No, of course not.
So having an organization, I've got my own dog in the fight of politics, and for that reason, I don't feel, as drawn to that sort of thing. Now, obviously, commentators, people who run, talk shows, very good. It's an integral part of politics, and that's obviously, good to have. But I think I'm talking more on the rank and file, that when you have your own movement, your own organization, men in the organization who have been in a few years, they can look back and they can see positive change, not just in the direction of the country that is outside of your control, maybe except for if you voted for Trump, then maybe you can try to feel like you're a part of something that's happened. But realistically, you're not moving the dial.
Right.
But if you're organized, if you're acting with these things on the granular ground level, then you can look back after a few years and see change in your lives and the lives of people you care about, and actually attribute that to your own efforts. And I think that's a huge thing that our men, the men of our race and nation, have been ripped away from. And because we've been ripped away from organizations, brotherhoods, fraternities, societies. So having that, I feel like it breaks kind of the cycle. I feel like so much, you're talking about co-opting, you're talking about being stuck in a cultural thing. I think, and obviously I'm biased, but I think organization and regimentation of lives and activity is a huge antidote to that sort of thing. Because I feel like we can only, the same thing, with a movement, in general, like we're at some point, we're going to have all these institutions. At some point, the left was really good about this, that the left not only took ground politically, but they made people change the way they live as they took it. We're going to need to do the same thing. And it's better to start now than, just hope. And again, like Trump was a very top-down strategy for change. And that can work. But it can't work alone. It needs to also be bottom up. At the best, you can do kind of a barbell method from both ends. But, you need to have you need to have systems in place for changing the way people live.
Well, one of these things you're talking about in terms of building organization, obviously these sort of parallel economic structures where you see people starting their own businesses, having their own networks. A lot of different groups are trying to do this kind of thing. But, as I'm sure you saw, you see these reporters come in and immediately try to break everything up. And there's also the question of you're still subject to state power. And if you have an aggressive left-wing state government, local government, whatever it is, or feds, in a few years, they're going to not let you do these sorts of things. So the question becomes, you build what you can, but you're always at the risk of total destruction if somebody worse than Trump comes along, which then forces you into the same position of like, well, I guess we got to at least make sure that somebody like Trump is still in there for us to be allowed to do this other stuff.
No, even if you don't care about conventional politics, it cares about you. And, PF has engaged to extents, to quiet extents with the conventional political landscape to the degree that we can right now. And we have found that we can be successful. You actually can win certain races because we have built up the manpower and the ground game, in the organized, we have a bunch of guys and we can tell them where to go and what to do. And they're guys who are good at following orders. They're guys who are, white, fit, upstanding, right, morally congruent men. And that is a very valuable degree of manpower in the political landscape because a lot of other people are, working with DMV type demographics, which makes us much more successessuccessful in comparison. And on the contrary, a lot of people say, oh, PF, whatever they're doing, as soon as a leftist, as soon as, a Democrat gets in power again, they're going to be destroyed. Biden, I think he was a Democrat, and it was tough in some ways, but it wasn't tough because of Biden. It was tough because of just other circumstances. I think there is the risk of state power. There's always the risk of state power. But there's also something to be said that you can be careful, that, and you touched on businesses. We recently had, an article which came out where they, tried to dox some businesses and tried to point out these guys. And it was a huge cultural shift because in 2015, that would have
been the end of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been cataclysmic. Oh, it's all over, right? Obviously, it wouldn't have been over because we're tough. But the response to it would have been, look at that. It's so over for PF. All those guys, their lives are destroyed. Point at them for being failures, right? That's what they say. But this time, because of how much that's changed, I think 3 million people saw that post. And 90+% of the comments were absolutely frantically supportive. That, oh, that's great. I'm into that. Joke's on you. That's, and that was huge to see because I've never seen that kind of positive response to what is essentially a docs article before. And I think that's
definitely the biggest cultural change in the last years or two.
That kind of shift is huge. And I want people to realize that, they pointed out one network, one node of all of this. But PF is doing this stuff continentally. We're doing this everywhere. And, where one network may be ahead of a few other networks in PF, it's only 1 or 2 years ahead. We have our dog in the fight, like I said, and we are a multi-tool in the political landscape. If you want to, all these people. I think a huge thing about the old movement, right? You know, the 2017 and before era. You know, you needed a group for every little niche.
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
oh, I'm really outdoorsy. I want to do hiking, and so I need a group for that. Oh, well, I'm really working class. I want to do a job networking group. Oh, well, I'm a highfalutin suit and tie guy. No offense. You know, so I need a.
I've been called a lot of things,
Yeah.
but not highfalutin suit and tie guy.
So I need a conference networking group, or I need a really clean cut group where we're doing, and just focusing on whatever. You get,
right.
there are all these niches. Every group had to have a little niche. And something that I came across is, we started off in one or two or maybe three of these, and then I figured, well, we don't need to have a different group for that, and I'm just going to get the next one and the next one. And we've conquered all these niches to where if you want to do nationalist event venue space building, if you want to do business networking, if you want to do fitness and boxing tournaments, if you want to do family events, and if you want to do charities for, families having new babies, if you want to do disaster relief, if you want to do literature, if you want to do street activism, if you want to do the grungy type of, murals under a bridge street activism, or if you want to do the standing on a bridge with banners street activism, everything. If you want to do music and culture and social media, we can do all of it. And I think a lot of people just didn't realize that you can actually throw all this stuff together.
Yeah.
And it makes it better, not worse. Because a lot of people out there, everybody has their own interest, everybody has their own preference. Everybody's going to like one thing more than other things, right? That's just how people work. And you need to be able to get them to work together, I think, in part of that. But anyways, you can survive a oppositional administration. We've done it once, and we'll certainly do it again. It just counts on being, having a wide multitude of tactics, and we are extremely, something I say is get attached to principles and not tactics, right? Everything we're doing tactically, we could do away with if we had to, right? All of that is just based on what we're getting out of it. Never find yourself in a position where you're just doing something because it's what you do, right? I'm never doing a march because, well, it seems like it's about that time again.
Yeah,
it's probably the right thing to do. It's been a few months, right? No, we're doing it because we actually know what we're getting out of it. The same thing with everything else we do. And I think a lot of people, not just in politics, but in life, they get stuck in the kind of, well, I'm just doing this because it's what everybody does. It's like,
yeah.
What are you getting out of it? So that's one angle. And, always have the same principles. Like, no matter what happens, I'm going to hold, stick to my guns, my proverbial guns, on what I believe and what I stand for and who my people are and what kind of society I believe we have a right and an obligation to build. But how I reach that, it can be any one of these things that I've described, and we need to be tactically viable.
Right. Do you find it hard to keep people invested long term? Because certainly I'd say one of the biggest things I've seen in the movement is you get people, especially people who get fired up by something they saw on social media or whatever else, and they come in, and a lot of times they even play like, I'm more extreme than you. Like, I've been doing this for a while, but like, actually you're a cuck, you're not going far enough. And then they go crazy for about a year, and then they just kind of drop out and you never hear from them again.
Yeah. No, so that does happen. And you do have to deal with all types. And there's also a degree to that is something which is just inherent in the human condition.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of people who have trouble being consistent about anything. And, when you're doing organizing, it is important to reflect on that. When you're approaching a problem and you say, wow, this guy, these types of people have this problem. Now, you should never be complacent about it, but there's an important thing to reflect on. Is this just a thing where humans have this problem, especially, white men? Is this just a problem that's inherent in, the system of man? But yeah, that is something that we see. But also it's something that, you see people consistent. And you have to have a pathway open to let people tell you which ones they are. And even somebody who's only going to be a member for a year or two, he's going to help us. In his time served, he's going to move the organization forward. I wish he would stick around longer, because ultimately PF is something which you could spend a lifetime in.
Right.
Maybe you can age out at a certain point, but it's something which you could really see for a long term. It's not like, oh, you do your 4 years or whatever.
Yeah,
it's
right.
not the military. It's a something you live within. At the same time, you need to have. So there are different ways in which you recruit people, and I think there is probably something that could be said. I don't have statistics on mind right now, but men who are recruited because they know somebody is a huge demographic. I think there's a lot of people, and it's really the people that we start with a lot of this stuff that are kind of self-starters. They are more radical. They are more, they care less about what the world thinks about them, which is good, because you need those people to start off, and you're really not going to be able to without them. And then as you grow, you're able to recruit the huge demographic of people which aren't going to join something unless they've met somebody. There's so many people out there, and this is a huge demographic of society, full stop, that aren't going to get involved in anything unless they know somebody who's in it, and he's like their friend, right? So PF is getting to the point now, and we've already been at the point where we're not just recruiting people from the internet. We have our application form. You have to go through that. But a lot of people join because they're in one of the clubs we work with, or they're a family member or a coworker, or they go to church with somebody, or they already know somebody. And I think that's a huge thing, because that builds a certain level of retention, because you're not just getting a retentive member within my scope. We're also getting members that are creating families, friend groups, church groups, whatever, that act as a middle ground buffer zone between us and the world at large.
Yeah, and it's a different type of person, too. I mean, very good point that you brought up, which is the first generation, so to speak, of people who join tend to be people who don't care what the world thinks about them and whatever else. And you need those people, and to some extent, we're all kind of those people. But at the same time, it's those types of people tend to be tough to get along with in a group solidarity thing. It tends to be the second generation, the people who come in who have something to lose, so to speak, that they're the ones who really take a group to the next level.
No, definitely. And, in that early space, those types of people, and PF's history really reflects this. We had a very rough and tumble first few years.
Yeah. The beginning is always interesting
rough.
Characters.
And, we had to face just about every challenge that there was to face. And we will face challenges again, obviously. But, it was a matter of finding the right men and finding the men that could at least get you to the right
men,
And that was something, but I think it's important, you never lose faith, right? You never lose the conception of what you're fighting for. I think a lot of people who had a lack of faith, they weren't as resolved as we are. When they saw everything happen in 2017, 18, they decided, you know what? Maybe this whole thing, maybe there's not merit to these ideas. And I almost can't blame people for thinking that after some of the craziness that happened. After some of these organizations fell apart in very embarrassing displays of personal inadequacy, a lot of people just concluded that, because these people were bad, then the ideas must be bad also.
Right.
But you don't realize that the people are just representatives of the ideas at best. They're not paragons. They're not literal avatars of this idea. So, a lot of people just won't be able to separate those two things. And it's important that, you realize that the man is a representative for the idea, but the idea, the concepts of nation, of, ethnic solidarity, of what we envision a moral and virtuous society to be, that is immortal, that is perennial, that is above us and almost beyond reaching in a sense of perfection.
Yeah. Very Eolian there. I like that. The question becomes, especially dealing with people who get worked up on social media, and they come into it all hard charging and everything else. I feel like that's what happened to a lot of people, especially after Charlottesville, where there were so many people who were showing up to that, and this was the first thing they had ever done. And I'd already been doing stuff for a decade before that. So it's okay, it's crazy, but whatever, I've seen a thing or two. But if you've got these other people coming in and the first time they see something, it's like a nightmare. You can't expect them to can't be too surprised when they panic and freak out.
Yeah.
Looking back on all of it, I mean, obviously neither of us were involved in the how it was all set up, but if you could go back in time and maybe make some decisions differently, both in terms of you, or if you had an ability to change what the movement as a whole did, going back to 2017, what would you do differently? What do you think were the biggest mistakes we made as a movement?
Goodness gracious.
So I'm trying to get you in trouble.
Yeah, I would have. First, I would invent a time machine and made myself born a few years earlier, so I could have started Patriot Front, and I would have told everybody to join. But besides that, I think the rally, just planning it, we're talking material things, right? It shouldn't have been planned as it was. Obviously, it could have been, it could have been like a PF event, which limits certain elements, but also doesn't limit others. It should have been, a flash demonstration with an outside component. Too many groups.
Yeah.
Too many big heads.
In fairness, though, and I will say this in defense of the guys who were organizing at the time, I don't think anybody expected, because it had just never happened before, the idea that the cops would drive the protesters and the counter-protesters together to fight. I don't think that had ever happened before. In retrospect, it's so obvious. But I don't think anybody predicted that.
I have seen at least one other case of it happening in California with one of the
Huntington, was it the Huntington Beach one, or was
No,
that
it
the
was like
or
in
the
the-
one at the Capitol?
No, it was like in the 80s or something.
Oh, that far
It was
back,
one of
okay.
those groups back then, and it was eerily similar. I remember watching it in an old documentary about, those movement days, and it was almost a beat for beat. It was eerie. It was almost a beat for beat replay.
Oh, that's wild. I'll have to check this out.
I believe it was like Tom Metzger's thing way back in the day. Very niche history here. Not an incredible fan, but it was a eerie beat for beat replay of, we're going to do a demo in a very leftist area. The mayor's going to shut it down. We're going to sue to get it back up. And the whole time, this is all generating news coverage, hysteria that builds it and builds it and builds it. And there's going to be more protesters. And then the people show up. They're vastly outnumbered. They get surrounded. The police push people together. Everybody fights. Immediately gets called an unlawful assembly. Everybody disperses. Bunch of people get arrested. Not the leftists. Whole deal. Now, I don't think the police in Charlottesville were following that playbook. I don't even think they ever knew about that. But it theoretically has happened. And it's again, in hindsight, yeah, obviously something like that was going to happen, especially when you looked at the actual layout of the fences and everything. It was a doomed to fail plan. So there's a lot that could have been done differently. But you could talk about what should have happened planning wise or organization wise or coordination wise. But the problem there is just the people, like and again, they're not bad people. Some of them, I assume are good people. But the actual, the manpower, the mass of people you had there was too discordant to actually regiment into a plan. Because
it was just everybody showing up.
Public assemblies are great, and we need to do them. But we have a political climate in the United States where we can't just tell people to show up. We need to do them with a more cohesive body in order to do them successfully. And I think that was a fundamental issue. And then I'm really good about staying out of drama. People will, obviously figures out there will say bad things about me or PF, and they have their disavowals, and I usually avoid, whenever, Nick Fuentes or Richard Spencer or other people like them, they throw slings and arrows at PF. I avoid, commenting in reply with any type of personal attacks or getting involved in drama and doing the whole screenshot, he said, she said. I think it's very unproductive, and I think a lot of people, you go back to the commercialized social media, a lot of people are really just in this for the drama, and you find out who they are when you don't have that. But I think, I think more people should be much less interested in that kind of thing, the interpersonal stuff. I'm very interested in focusing on the work and the actual accomplishments, and people can say all types of things about me, about PF, and whatever, and I'm going to, it's the scarce few times where I will turn the other cheek in my life, because it's a distraction. And a lot of people are doing it for their own attention, or they just feel like they have to comment on something. In the aftermath of, the rally, I think it was really important for people to realize that if you are the better man, if you have the better podcast, if you have the better group, if you're the better pundit, if you're going to be the better next Hitler, no, for real this time, right, then it's probably better for you to just show that by example. Because in politics, you can trash the other guy as much as you want. You can say all these things, but even the most spurned and humiliated political commentator is going to be able to scrape together some little audience and putter on. You're not going to be able to kick anybody out of politics. We're all here. We're all volunteers, right? We're all just here because we want to be. So focusing that energy just drags you both down. And, I say when you get involved in mudslinging like that, all the third party sees is two idiots covered in mud.
Right.
So that was a huge issue. And I think, again, I after Seville, I was in my very formative years, and I started a group right then in the month or two afterwards. So I got to see everything that was going on while it was still all on fire, and and at the same time, I was building my group and establishing what its core tenets and principles were going to be. So I was able to very easily say, okay, well, that's the issue where money destroyed that group, right? That's the issue where personalities destroyed that group. That's the issue where too big of a tent destroyed that group. And I was able to say, okay, well, we're going to cross that off, cross that off, cross that off. And we had a much firmer foundation because of it.
Well, certainly there are some things you only learn just by doing. Like you have to screw up to learn the lesson. I mean, you've been running this group for a while at this point. If you could do anything differently, or if you could, what have you learned in terms of, if I was starting PF over this is the decision I would make now as opposed to what I did then.
A lot of it is specifics, because when you show up to these things, there's no handbook,
No,
right?
certainly not.
There was not a lot of infrastructure left to us by previous iterations of the movement, and there's been stuff like this, not really like PF, but there's been stuff going around for decades.
I mean, there's been membership groups, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not like we didn't have a huge swathe of institutions. We didn't have a bunch of venues and spaces and commercial assets,
Right.
To help us get started. So every time you're facing a new issue, it's kind of like obviously it's a very grandiose comparison here, but when you're looking at the founding of the United States, like George Washington, he knew that every decision he makes, every time he comes to a problem, he's setting a precedent, because this has not been reached before in this context.
Right.
So when you're approaching one of these things, you really only have a kind of smoky past to guide you in terms of this problem, and you really need to prepare for setting a precedent. But anyways, a lot of the specifics, I would say, are systems. If I do one thing that's most highly skilled, I'm maybe not the best talker out of anybody in politics. I'm maybe not, the best, camera presence, or maybe I'm not the best writer or whatever. But the most high skilled thing I think I do is building systems for men. How you structure and coordinate men into leadership roles, what limitations those leadership roles have, what autonomy they have, how that interacts with the people above and below them. Right, when it turns into you have your network directors, you have the people below that, their clusters of membership, how those are delineated, how they work together. There's a lot of the really almost litigious stuff in building an organization.
No, that's important.
And you really don't know where your weak points are in these systems until somebody pushes on them. It's always internal, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's going to kind of veer off course, and you're going to say, oh, well, because of that, maybe we want to add this rule, we want to subtract that rule, we want to change that. Finding out where the weak points are in human nature in an organization like this, and setting up rules and boundaries, building up discipline. It's a lot of specifics that I would definitely have if I was starting a group now. Just knowledge on media, knowledge on associations and things like that. But the core principles have always been there. I know that sounds very, giving myself a lot of credit.
It's a very important point that systems are the most important thing, because I think so many people come into the movement and they say, well, I'm personally so brilliant, I'm personally so charismatic that I'm just going to sweep all before me. And it's like, well, no, it doesn't really work that way.
No.
But do you get frustrated sometimes feeling that, because both of us know like the movement, its history, its niche history, and all the crazy stories and personalities that come out of it. But do you feel like you had to start from scratch, or was there any particular thing that you took inspiration from or served as a mentor that you learned from?
I would say it was pretty scratch. I started with about 25 guys.
Depressing, but not surprising.
It was about 25 guys. We started off from a previous group, 25 guys, and they were all guys who'd worked with me in person. It was funny, all the guys who left with me, the previous group we were in, were all the ones who actually knew me, right? So I think that bodes well. And they were spread off across like half of the country. So it's not a dense 25 guys. It's not 25 guys in my city. And we had a Discord server which got banned in 2 months after that. So that's pretty scratch. I look a lot to history, for these things. Obviously, I'm not claiming any kind of direct iterational lineage from America's founding, but basic things I feel like I can call back on. Like the organization's rules on religious liberty, right? Mm-hmm. You're allowed now. It's a little altered, right? With more hindsight, you're allowed to be a Christian or a pagan or not either of those, but we can't have any foreign religions, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, whatever. But keeping kind of the peace within those, I think a lot of groups have had religious infighting. A lot of people have had sectional, back and forth, and it's not as common in some areas as others, but it definitely is present. But being able to reference history and say, oh, well, actually, there was a pretty solid American contextual principle on this, and we can use it today. And likewise referencing systems of personal virtue in terms of how a leader should act, and because I'm not the only leader in PF, right? There's dozens of organizers, there's dozens of people. I could not do this on my own. I physically lack the number of hands and the number of hours in the day. Maybe if I didn't have to sleep, then I could do a lot more than I could. But this is the work of hundreds and hundreds of people every single day. And like the systems you talked about, they're kind of boring. but they're also what everybody interacts with on a day-to-day basis.
And what everybody neglects when they're trying to
Exactly.
do stuff. Nobody talks about it.
No, they are the most mundane, but also there's going to be a lot of mundane work in what we have to do. I remember reading Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders, when he talks about recruiting the men, marshaling these men, and there's a lot of guys who are rough and tumble frontiersmen, and they're really ready, they're chomping at the bit to go kill some Spaniards.
Right, yeah.
And he tells them, hey, as a soldier, you're going to have to be just as ready to do the boring stuff like digging a foxhole as you are about like charging into enemy lines. You're going to have to be able to endure gunfire and disease with the same level of discipline and courage. And I think that's huge. That is a
I
huge
agree
principle.
completely. It's almost like there's so many people you could find at the drop of a hat to be like, okay, get ready to die for the homeland. Like I've no doubt you could find people like actually ready to do that, ready to die, ready to sacrifice their lives. But it's like,
Oh, they
listen,
email me.
Yeah, right. Listen, brother, I'm here to. But if you say, listen, I need you to do 5 hours a week processing this thing, taking care of these documents, filing this paperwork, like suddenly there's just nowhere to be found.
Yeah, people are seemingly more ready to run into a machine gun nest than run a spreadsheet, right? But I mean, the revolution will require spreadsheets,
Yes.
right? It will require mundane tasks. And I think, in order to get people to do those, it's just another element of human nature. Again, so much of organizing is understanding how people work. And some people get cynical with it. I don't. I have faith in people. I have an immense amount of, large amount of affection and pride in the men that we've gathered with the organization. But if you're going to have mundane work, you can't be, alone, right? People need a system that rewards them, and our guys aren't paid. I'm barely paid. They do it because there is a internal meritocratic, system within the organization where the harder you work, the more you get back in terms of prestige, and the more you are rewarded with often more work, but better work.
Yeah, right.
And you're able to, grow in standing among your peers, but you have someone to prove yourself to, which I feel like is what so many men lack. You could work really hard, but your boss doesn't really care about you. He doesn't. He's not going to really be proud of you. You can prove yourself, in a lot of spaces, and you could be the strongest guy at the gym, but those other guys don't know you exist. Everybody's very atomized. They're just kind of driving from business to business and spending money or making money. And there's not any overarching system which actually judges your virtue and character.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think the biggest thing when I think of, because I'm somebody who worked in like the normie conservative movement for however many years. Right. Now, of course, I was doing it under fake names, so I was leading like a dual life. I do not recommend that strategy, by the way. That's something you could get away with in like 2008, 2012. You cannot get away with that now.
Right.
But the biggest frustration with a lot of these older conservatives, not just the Reagan rose-colored glasses and the rest of it, but they'll say things like, well, just go to church, just get involved in your communities. And so it's like,
talk to your
you
brother.
have any idea, like these social organizations that used to exist for these older people, they're not a thing. Like if you're a white man, certainly under 35, like you really are starting from scratch in terms of just like rebuilding a society, because it's just been gutted.
Yeah, and I've heard the complaint of like, oh, well, if your thing is about business networking and self-improvement, why not just do that without being like a radical nationalist? Well, it's like, because I am a radical nationalist.
Right, yeah, that too.
Why not just do that like without all the racial stuff? It's like, well, I like the racial stuff. I'm all about the racial stuff. It's really important to me.
That if you look at the people who are starting businesses and you're on lunch, I mean, you look at all the you look at the Indians, you look at Somalis, you look at even the Haitians, stuff like that. It's because they're operating as an ethnic group that they're able to get a leg up.
That's the point. Why do that without being a nationalist? Like, being a nationalist politically toxic. Like, but that's the point, though. The point is that we are nationalists, and I think anything can be political if done with the right intention. Right. Going to a boxing gym can be political if the intentionality is that you are a nationalist and the other guys are nationalists, and that's a nationalist boxing gym.
Yep.
That's now a political act. I'm constantly telling people, when they show up in the org, oh, we got to do some activism or maybe some of this other stuff. I said, no. That family event, that baby fundraiser, that's activism too, right? Yeah. It has the intention. Activism isn't just putting out street signs or voting in an election. Activism is working in a group with some kind of political motive to solve a problem. It's the methodology, the ideology of activity. That's what activism is. So, you need to create spaces that overarch and connect these things, like you said, and you need to do more than normal. So many guys, just we'll just be a family man, bootstraps, work as hard as you can. But that's not enough anymore.
No,
it wasn't enough in the 90s.
No.
And
yeah, people talk about, the 90s, it was so great. It was like colorblind and whatever else. It's like, are you completely insane? Like, it was never a thing.
And that's not what people were doing back then.
No, not at all.
Back before all these social institutions were ripped away from the men of the nation, they were, in a sense, just working hard, but there was an intentionality to it. There was a solidarity and a loyalty that permeated all these actions, that you're not just working really hard for the sake of the company or for the sake of, get a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. Money is not inherently valuable. Money is an exchange that you can get things that are valuable with it, right? There's these certain base elements of the societal functions that our conceptions of them in the modern sense are totally vestigial. They're totally resulting from a several iterations, devolved concept of the thing, to the point where everybody's just debating on these vestigial, filaments of society. I'm getting very theoretical.
No, but I understand exactly what you're saying. Even if you talk about something like, people talk about family or marriage or something like that, and it's like, what prior generations took those words to mean is very different than what we have now. What you have now is basically a contract that doesn't really have any sincere obligation the same way it would have like a century ago, where it was a big deal if you didn't live up to these things. And that's true with everything.
I'm always interested in trying to, look at the thing, whatever the thing is, whether it's a family, it's an institution, it's an action, and, just kind of go, why? Right? And then ask why again. It's kind of like a toddler asks you these questions. It just keeps asking you why. I think everything you do.
I was going to say Aristotle, but toddler worked too. Like, what is the nature of the thing in itself? Really, like what is the nature of the thing in itself? That's what your 4-year-old is asking too.
Exactly. Well, we're smart before we get taught to be stupid.
Right. That's true.
But I think everything you do should be about 3 or 4 whys away from your ultimate purpose, right? And, why are you building a family? Well, maybe you want kids. Well, why do you want kids? Because you want to preserve your legacy. Well, why do you want to preserve your legacy?
Right.
Well, because I care about my nation and my people and my lineage and my being, who I am. So everything you're doing, even if it's going to work, even if it's doing these mundane things, well, why are you running that spreadsheet? Well, I need to know who's showing up to the event. Well, why do you need to know, right? So you just go through, and everything should always attach about 3 or 4 whys away from the nation, right? Which I believe is the building block of our society. Now, I'm all about the white race. I love those guys, right? I love the European peoples, but I don't think I can organize on a totally racial basis. Now, I don't think that a Latvian, and a Canadian can exist within the same government, especially spread across the entire world. So I think that the nation is the building block, right? And also the nation is the vehicle that has the most dynamism to actually achieve our goals. You see leftists, and they'll talk about how, we need to unite the working class to do this and that, and that's what they say, at least the socialist ones. But the working class is not an effective enough vehicle to actually defeat a lot of the people that they don't. And the people that they don't like, when they're not us, are a lot of the people that we also don't like.
Right.
But the mass amalgamated multicultural working class is not a coalition that'll actually work, and I don't think they've ever figured this out. But and then you have conservatives like, well, we need a coalition of just like people with the right ideas, people with the right mindsets. But the nation, the nationalist, is the only one who understands that the actual vehicle that is capable of punching through these barriers is the nation, is the united nation, with the concept of who it is as an intra-racial, extra-communal thing, which has an identity and it has a form of culture and a way of life. That is the vehicle which can punch through the issues that we're facing as a society. Nothing else is strong enough. That's a core element of nationalism. But anyways. Yeah, that's its own cul-de-sac.
It's an important point, though, because, there are 2 things I could bring up with that. One, of course, you brought up the sectional thing and the religious debates, which and all these things, generate more heat than light. But the fighting between, like, Europeans and Americans, especially on social media, where it's like, well, you guys are lost. No, you guys are lost. And it's like, don't you people realize, like, we're kind of in the same position here? Like, nobody's really that much better off than anybody else. And the second thing, of course, being what is our approach to the nation? Because I think you and I see the nation the same way. If you say, what is an American? It is a necessary component of being an American to be white.
Yeah.
That is what it means to be American.
Yes.
And so therefore, in a way, to be an American now we're actually kind of the colonized people, because in a lot of ways, huge territories of our country are basically occupied by foreigners, and we have no political power. And whatever we may think about the way politics is going in this country with the guy in the White House now and everything else, certainly prefer him to Kamala, but
Yeah.
he's not anti-white, God knows, but he's not pro-white. And certainly I don't think there's a single pro-white elected official anywhere in the United States. So like we have
Not
like
yet.
zero political representation. We have less political representation than anybody else, even though we are the nation.
In a conscious, aware sense, yes, that is absolutely correct. And you can understand all of that, but you can't lose the actual culture that we belong to, because yes, the United States is deeply flawed. Yes, we live in a scarred and ravaged land, but at the same time, we are not. We are, some people say, "Oh, well, we were Europeans. We were white European before we were American." But it doesn't matter how bad the state gets. We're American.
The state and the nation are not the same thing.
We're Americans before we're citizens, is I think the more accurate statement on that matter. And you said within the movement spaces, you'll find a lot of people who really get kind of the post-American, pan-racial sort of, even post-political pan-racial sort of kind of, it gets a little weird.
Yeah.
But then when you actually approach people on it,
Yeah, exactly.
the common man understands a national identity. And I think there's a lot of things which people in the movement, in radical politics have tried to reinvent that the regular guy understood all along.
That's exactly right. I mean, I would say the biggest reason why you want to get people involved in mainstream politics, at least a little bit, like force them to knock on doors for an election or whatever else, is not so much because like you're going to win somehow by doing that, but just to talk to normal people and be like, oh, wait, actually what we're talking about online has nothing to do with the people we're trying to reach. They don't think this way.
I think something about election strategy, which a lot of people have missed, is that winning the election should be your primary objective, right? This is a general practice. I'm always primary, secondary, tertiary objective. I'm going into the field. What are the three things I'm going to accomplish? And the primary is always the thing that I'm happy leaving the field and sacrificing all of the other objectives for, right? That's my main goal. This is just general life stuff. And then if I can't do my first goal, then if I get the rest of them, then I'm similarly happy, right? With a campaign, and you have had kind of upstart nationalist people running campaigns, and that is a valuable strategy as agitation.
Yeah.
Because there are things in politics, what we're doing in PF, the social building and the community aspects and the infrastructure and the activism and the creating networks and systems for men to live within. That is extremely valuable. It is extremely necessary, but it doesn't have the same kind of layman appeal to, oh, I'm running for office.
Yeah.
A lot of regular people, bless their hearts, just get that in a way that doesn't need to be explained to them. So there is an element in running an agitation political campaign for the purpose of just getting your foot in the door, figuratively or literally. But winning the election, while it should be your primary objective, should never be your only objective. That should be a vehicle for getting to know people, building networks, building up a base of support, learning on how to do the next thing. And again, I think winning elections in a coordinated capacity is something, especially on the local level, which can be done. Maybe not as like a Patriot Front candidate, right? But as a candidate which at least has valuable principles or is going to be able to operate that station, that office, with the proper motive and actually accomplish certain objectives.
Right.
The problem is nobody's had a ground game which can compete before now. Yeah. And again, it's just one of those things, like, you can do it, but the people going into that space need to make sure that space is compromising to them, to the nationalist angle, and not them compromising to the conservative angle. And likewise, the people that are working on this need to be more loyal to your radical group than they are to their new station. Or at the very least, the people you're putting in this position need to be, they need to owe you something. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but
no, that's the nature of politics.
If you withdraw your support the next time around, that has to be the difference. So there needs to be something to hold people, and I think leaders need to be held accountable. I'm incredibly accountable for every decision I make, so that's not something I exempt myself from. Mm-hmm. But I think there's just basic principles, and I think so much. We said we're starting from scratch, and it would be, and not everything we're learning has this great ideological consequential to it, right? And that's not a word, right? But
I know what you're saying. I mean,
not everything.
But here's the thing:
this is life we're learning.
Yeah, and this is one of the frustrations. And I say this as somebody who mostly writes and speaks for a living. It's almost like, is there anything else to say? I mean, there's been so much like theory crafting and grand
Yeah.
strategy, and this is what the ethno-state's going to look like in 2500 or whatever. And it's like, can we just get 20 guys together to try to build a network or something?
Yeah.
Like that seems like
A
the
lot of
obvious
guys,
first step.
They already have their ethno-state named. but
Yeah,
they
their
have-
titles and the military and all the rest, and it's like,
and this is my seal of office. Okay. Name 5
here's
friends.
the flag.
Yeah.
Name 3 friends who will show up to your house
Yeah.
in 24 hours if you need them.
And I think because again, we've been shut out. Nationalists have been shut out of conventional politics and the institutions for so long that we have such a depth of ideological understanding, but we don't have a practical understanding of politics.
Yeah.
And you need to build that up. And I totally get what you're saying about like everything's been said. I listen to a remarkably small amount of like podcasts and ideological material and content, and a lot of people do, because a lot of it, I just feel like I'm being lectured about stuff. Like
Right.
I'm listening to speeches. I go to the conference and I learn and I love a lot of the stuff. Especially your stuff's very good.
Well, thank you.
But sometimes I'm listening to it and it's just like I know. I'm working on it. I'm trying. I'm really busy.
No, I know this goes. I mean, this is the thing: is people get sort of where we're at is that the biggest frustration is the other side is paid full time, very lucrative salaries to do the kind of stuff that we do basically for free or investing our own money. And my old boss, again, mainstream conservative, whatever, but my old boss, Morton Blackwell, said the victory belongs to the side with the greater number of effective activists. And one of ours is worth 100 of theirs, but they have 1,000 for every single one. And mostly because the NGOs get money from the government, the philanthropists give them all this money. We're competing with this huge money network that we just don't have. And so what really faces us, you can say, well, it's this group or that group or all these obstacles, but really it's just the frustrations of everyday life in the sense that there just aren't enough hours in the day. There's not enough money in the bank. There aren't enough people who can take away time from work. That seems to be, if I had to say, like, what are we facing that's the biggest problem, it's that, like, petty shit.
It's occupational. Yeah.
Because the other side, that's just something they don't have to deal with because they essentially have unlimited money and therefore unlimited time. So the question becomes, I mean, aside from building up the kind of networks from the bottom up, maybe that's the only thing we can do. How do we overcome that? Because, like they say, good generals study tactics, great generals study logistics.
Yeah, and I've been called a logistician before.
That bodes well. I mean,
a lot of the people you're describing on the left who have these kind of full-time leftist positions. Now, a lot of them are paid through NGOs and other things like that. But even more of them, I think it's a huge thing. They have built up networks and they live in them. Their friends are leftists. The people that they work with are leftists, even if it's not their job.
Yeah.
Their job is connected to it. And maybe they wouldn't have their job if they didn't have that ideological thing. And if they suddenly dropped all their political work, maybe they wouldn't have their job. They wouldn't have their friends. Maybe the people that they live with, their roommates, wouldn't be fans of them anymore. So I think, again, leftists conquered spaces and then they demanded change in lifestyle. And I think we as nationalists need to do that. That the average stock of, the American that is on the street, he watches football, maybe he smokes, maybe he drinks too much, right? Maybe he's definitely not educated in terms of politics enough. Again, the common man is good, but he's too common, right?
Right.
So we need to ask for change, and we can build up. It's easy to say that we should have these big NGO money systems, right? But I feel like doing that too early, and I see money. I don't like money. I wish I could.
Well,
live without
there's
it.
definitely,
But
when you bring it with the streamers, I mean, it has become almost just entertainment at this
if you
point.
do that without the deep social loyalty and the virtue, culture, then I think you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. So I think building up first as a movement, again, guys in PF aren't paid to be Patriot Front members.
Right.
But a lot of them do these things kind of as a part-time job because there is a common understanding of I'm investing in something which is bigger than myself and it's going to help the people I care about, right? Where their family likes the group. Maybe they work with members of the group. Maybe they live with members of the group. They go to the gym with other members of the group. A lot of their friends, if not all of them, are also members of the group, either because they've absorbed their friend group and their church group and everything into PF, or because they haven't had that and then found it within PF, right? And PF is big enough where you can live your life within it. Right? You can, you can go worship with other members of the group. You can train. You can seek your goals, whether it's personal, whether you want to get off of a few, substances, or you want to get into a few better behaviors, right? That the org is big enough for your dreams to live within it.
Right.
And I think that's where you need to start. because if you go too early into the commercialization, money can be, money is necessary, but I wish it wasn't in some contexts. So I think that's what you need to do. You need to create systems in which, in order to be an understanding, an expectation within your community space is some kind of political work. And there's lots of things that you can do, right? You can help the movement in a lot of ways, but picking one is, I think, the expectation. And, our guys are worth 100 of theirs, right? But we just need to make them even better, and we need to have a lot more. And at some point, there will be space for that kind of. And I don't want to get funding from the government, until we are the government,
right?
But I think there will be space for more and more complexity and regimentation. And with all the laws, obviously, I fully believe in law-abiding conduct in all contexts whatsoever. In case this ever gets quoted back to me in a courtroom. But I think it is important to do as much as you can, and there's a lot of smart ways to stay within the law, but also accomplish objectives in terms of having a business, having money, having assets, and things of that nature. There's smart ways that a lot of people, I don't want to say have gamed the system, because that's what our opponents do, but we should be able to live within current boundaries while also achieving our goals, and we can. It's just a lot of people, frankly, haven't tried hard enough.
Yeah, I think that's a big frustration. I mean, there are so many opportunities that are there, and it's just people haven't done them. People haven't taken them up.
And there's so many people, who do the kind of the secret conservative thing. And I mean, there is value in networking in these institutions if you have a broader goal. Now, doing it just yourself, you need to be connected to something outside of you. You need to be infiltrating on behalf of something.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Or you're not actually infiltrating. You're just assimilating.
You're just some guy. You're just a guy with a job. I mean, that's nothing to brag about.
But there's so many guys who I've seen, and they're in positions, like they have sway, and they believe everything I believe. In terms of being a nationalist, if they just acted like one. Now, I don't want to be rude here, but there's plenty of people who think like one, but don't act like one.
Probably know some of the same people, yeah.
Yeah, and if you just did that, and now nobody wants to be, the first unhammered nail, right?
Right.
Nobody wants to be the first past the post on this kind of thing, but it's one of those things. Remember COVID flattening the curve, right?
Yeah,
if everybody does it, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing with doxing. That's like the grand irony of it. Like if everybody was doxed at once, like we would instantly win.
It would
all be over.
Piecemeal. And the doxing itself has also lost a lot of teeth, knock on wood, right? But the doxes of today just don't seem, and maybe it's because we have these community networks built up so much. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because the kind of maybe cancel culture, so-called, has kind of seen its peak already. Maybe it's because people are just desensitized to it, and people are tired of hearing it. And also, I think X being bought out
that had a huge impact,
because that was the forum for doxes and rallying people to go harm people. And how the left reacts to that, I think, is going to be interesting. I think they're bitter about it, and they don't have this avenue. So, we'll see. But I think it's important now. And I mean, a lot of PF members are doxed. A lot of their information, I mean, and not even present PF members, people have been doxed as, oh, you're a member of PF, maybe due to some stupid social media connection 3 years ago. But I think people don't realize how many members of PF that nobody knows about. Except for us, of course. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. We have a lot of things that we're building, and it is still important to not have everything above ground in terms of public information accessibility, because a lot of these things are fragile and they do need to be built up carefully. But it's important that whenever things like that do happen, that you're adaptable, and you remember, the tactic is adaptable. How you go about things is adaptable, but the principle, your motive, why you're doing it remains exactly the same.
Right. That's something that I wanted to ask you about, is sort of the security culture within PF, because obviously this is probably the most common objection. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I say, well, listen, you should join this group, they're doing all these great things, to say, well, I don't want to get doxxed. And it's like, on the one hand, I always tell people, like, look, you got to prepare for it. I mean, there are ways of getting doxxed that you couldn't possibly have predicted, like in my case. But on the other hand, it's inevitable, but you shouldn't assume that it's just going to happen tomorrow. Or that if you don't do certain things, you can pretty much prevent 99% of the ways that they get you.
99%, maybe close to that of doxes I've seen are in some part due to user error, right?
Yeah.
It's on the personal end. And I'm not blaming those guys, but there is a level of discipline and diligence and vigilance you can have in your personal life, which will essentially render you safe in a lot of these things. There are members who have been members for 5 years, and the public does not know their names or where they work or where they live, right? And that's because they've been really and there's some of the guys, who show up and they say, well, I don't really care about getting doxxed. I don't care. Put my information out there. And I said, well, I care for you, right? I care so much that I'm going to give you some of that care, and you have to follow this baseline expectation because you may not care, but the guy they dox because of you, right?
Oh, yeah.
He will care. So, there is that security culture. Everybody has to follow a baseline standard of things that you do. And there's also a culture of trust, because when you have a culture of anonymity, you need to balance that with a culture of trust. Because we don't necessarily have, our driver's licenses worn on lanyards around our necks at events. We have a culture where when people are talking about our vetting system, the critique has been made that, you don't really know who this guy is because he's not applying with some kind of, where you don't get his address and his phone number and things like that. That's not in the application. I don't want that information I don't want to have it. I don't store it. There's no list. There's no list of members. And there's no list that would be of any value to anybody. So to balance that, you need to have a culture of trust. And what's more important than somebody's legal name is knowing what kind of man they are, because that has a greater impact on his. Because you're not actually just trying to find his name. Again, why, right? Why do you want to know this guy's name? Why do you want to know where he lives? Why do you want this information? Because it tells you something about him. Right. And what do you want to know? What kind of man he is, right? So when you're trying to find that information, the best way to find out what kind of man somebody is not his job or the name on his birth certificate. It's what he does. A man is the kind of man he is because of his actions and his deeds and his accomplishments. And the organization is a engine for deeds. It is a dynamo for accomplishing tasks and objectives. So in some context, I can find out what kind of man one of our members is, without knowing his legal name or where he works. Maybe I'll know what type of job he has at some point. And some guys, obviously, you're going to know their personal information at a certain point, right? But it's still it's compartmentalized and there's no collected list, And if anybody were to subpoena me, I have plausible deniability because maybe I forgot. I'm a very forgetful guy. But I can find out more about him in a sense about what really matters than maybe his coworkers know, right? Than maybe his cousins know. Yeah. Because I've established a space in which he can excel and actually live to a full capacity of how a man is meant to live, with challenges, expectations, a meritocratic, culture which demands virtue and honor and will actually punish vice and apathy. Again, we need to take a look at everything which has been torn away from us and then establish that, and then orient all these normal things with the overarching purpose in the direction of political change. That's the goal of the organization. If I had to sum it up in one word, it's change, right? Oh, do you want to win election? Oh, do you want to do this? Oh, do you want to do economics? Or you think you're just going to jujitsu your way into sovereignty? Maybe. We could try. But why not? But it's change. And change is and I always tell people, when people say, whenever you hear when we win one day, or one day when we win after victory, and I always correct them. Victory is every day. Winning is something you can do every day. You wake up, you have the chance to either win or you lose, or maybe you break even. It's a stalemate. But that's how you need to think about victory. Too many people define our cause by waiting, right? By waiting for some big thing to happen to them, right? Yeah, right. Ezra Pound said, a slave is one who waits to be freed, right? Victory is an option that you have on the table every single day.
How do you deal with, which I think is probably the greatest frustration of anyone who's dealt with a membership group, those who break faith?
In what context?
Well, there are people who betray. There are when people drop out, that's one thing. But there are those who betray. There are those who turn on other members. There are those who try to hurt the people that they were once a part of.
Yeah,
unfortunately, this is just a part of human nature.
Oh, of course. And again, it's always important to realize when you're running into something like that, if it causes you to be disheartened, is this just a fact of life? Yeah. And a lot of times it is.
It is.
Yeah. So I don't have a whole lot of examples of somebody leaving the organization and then, now I'm a super liberal. Yeah, right. I'm putting a coexist sticker on the back of my Prius. That doesn't really happen. Maybe it's happened once. I don't know. But it probably doesn't happen. In the sense of somebody kind of betrays, usually due to some kind of administrative, organizational, personality conflict. Yeah, I've been betrayed. I've had people, go against me. I've had people, leave because of things. And I think it's always just important in how you conduct yourself personally. I never lose faith, because I have faith in the human condition.
Right.
I have faith in the men. And I've never been, it's always the odd man out. I've never been betrayed in like total aggregate. Because if everybody betrays you, then maybe you're the problem.
Yeah, right.
But if you're being betrayed by one guy every now and then maybe they're the problem, right? You've been betrayed by 109 guys.
Yeah, I was about to make the joke. You
beat you to it. But so that's never been a problem. And I mean, self-reflection is important. And I'm always, reflecting. And I have a lot of counsel. Again, as a leader, I'm not a monolith. I'm not an island. When I make decisions, usually before I make decisions, I have people who I trust. I think yes men are a really dangerous thing for a leader. I'm making decisions. I have people close to me. I will field that decision or that statement to, and I'll say, hey, if you think there's something wrong with this, if you think I'm out of order here, or I'm overreaching, or I'm being too harsh, or not understanding enough, or maybe too understanding or not harsh enough, I need you to tell me. It is your responsibility as somebody who cares about both your community that you live in, which I'm upstream of, and me as a person, to tell me if you think and to get correction. And I think as a leader, it's really important when you get that correction. A lot of people, especially when you're in a position of prestige or tenure, it's really easy. There's a part of your brain. I think everybody has this where it's like, no, I'm better than you. No, I outrank you, so I'm just You're wrong and I'm right. There is that like reptile part of the brain somewhere in there, and you need to push that away, and you need to kind of quiet yourself and have humility. I think humility. One of my friends said, humility is the root of all virtue, and if it's not, then it's really close, right? Because without humility, you can't better yourself for all the other virtues, because nobody's born with all these things. You have to cultivate them. It's a very natural process, like a garden. So having the humility to recognize when you have sometimes made a step too far, or you need to correct yourself, that will avoid the wrong kind of betrayals where it's your fault.
Yeah, right.
There's no right kind of betrayal, but it'll avoid the cases where it's really perilous. In other cases, you don't want to die on every hill administratively. I've had administrative differences with men in the organization, where I think that this decision is better. And I've compromised on tactical matters, never on ideals. But, when you're dealing with a problem about how to go about a thing, know when a reasonable compromise can be met to explore new ideas. Don't shut things down just because it wasn't your idea. Again, humility is a huge aspect of this, knowing that it's all bigger than you. And I think I'm uniquely situated because my entire life has not just been this type of politics. It's been Patriot Front since I was 18. I've had other jobs, in case you're curious. I've had real, quote unquote, real jobs, since then. But it's my life, and extremely little of me exists outside the organization, right? So it is connected with my being.
You think that's why it's lasted while so many others have fallen apart?
I think so, because it's kind of like a burns the ships sort of thing.
Right.
That I don't have anything else to really go back to. But at the same time, because it's so intertwined with my personal identity, I don't have the same kind of faults that I think a lot of leaders do. And I'm not perfect. And I make mistakes. Any leader or anybody who tells you that they don't make mistakes is either crazy or lying to you.
Yeah.
Right?
And certainly the movement could use a bit more self-awareness sometimes.
I think humility is very lacking in politics.
Very lacking in our corner specifically.
But I think because it's so intertwined, I don't treat it as something which I can separate from myself, which I think is good. I think we need more leaders which have a life of service. I think, you look back at great statesmen, again, George Washington, for example, there's a reason I like him, his entire life, decades and decades, he was always doing something, whether it was a surveyor or as a soldier or as a general or as a president or a member of the, he was in the House of Burgesses too, I'm pretty sure. His whole life was bent with service. He did a lot of different things, but it was always service to the country, even before the country was the country.
Right.
I think, we need more men who have statesmanship. Statesmanship is lacking. Statesmanship is a core occupation which we no longer have. A lot of people look into the founders and they say, oh, well, they were all lawyers. They were all really. It's like, no, they were studying law to be practitioners of law in the sense of making laws and serving the state, which obviously is a mechanism of law.
Right.
Anyways, we need cultivation of virtue. We need spaces where men can come up and become, indoctrinated in the good sense, right? Taught doctrine of leadership and virtue, because too much of politics is an afterthought in terms of how you should actually exist within it.
Right. Well, so much of what you've talked about, I mean, when you think of what is the ultimate test of the sort of systems that you're building, and you're not gray like me, so you got plenty of years yet, but I mean, the ultimate test is, of course, where does Patriot Front go once you're no longer in charge? 10 years now, 20, 30, 40.
Hopefully a good amount. Yeah. But yeah,
you find yourself like thinking about that for like the really long term, because I mean, what is the point of the systems if not to train your successor in some way?
I want the organization to outlive me, and I want the nation to outlive me. I think it has to, and I think because it is so dedicated to something which outlives us all. I mean, the nation is in a sense immortal, right?
Yeah.
Now, nations live and nations die on a sort of super organism timescale, but in the human context, in the context of our lives, the nation is the immortal things. Even with somebody's, like a rich man, right? He'll leave money to his children. Maybe he'll have an estate, like a really rich man. Maybe that'll last a couple generations. But nobody really knows. I mean, unless you're some kind of monarch, and that's not really big on this side of the Atlantic, nobody really knows the great-grandchild of these big American figures. I mean, it's like a trivia fact.
Yeah,
you're a
right.
great-grandkid of some, So I think real achieving legacy and immortality, and I think a lot of the core nucleus of masculinity is trying to attain immortality, even though you kind of can't. I mean, obviously, outside of the religious angle, of course, in the material world.
I think that's a really good point. It's the dual recognition. It's the striving for immortality with the recognition that, like, oh, so I'm going to die.
The fact that you're not going to get there makes the work all
yeah, exactly.
But, dedicating yourself, a lot of rich men, like that legacy peters off when it's just the wealth of the family. But you look at great men who served the nation, right? And their legacy spans centuries, right? Because their accomplishments, their deeds, it's so much more a vessel for immortality. And I'm not saying don't care about your family. Obviously care about your family. Obviously. But, your heart is where your treasure is. And if your treasure is in money, if your treasure is in your estate, well, you can't take it with you. But the nation is the vehicle for immortality in a sense, and obviously still support your family, of course. But, there's a nuance there. So because the organization is so dedicated to this, immortal concept of the nation, I think it has a legacy built into it. And, at certain points, I'll start looking for a successor, maybe. Again, Washington, right? He was old and feeble and had to deny. He was looking in his later years. He really wanted to retire, right? And he went back in. I think one more time. He said in the farewell address he didn't want to do a second term, but the country just wasn't in the state yet where he could leave it alone. So I think, that will be kind of a natural progression. Maybe I'm a bit younger, maybe I'm a bit older. I don't know. Presidents and stuff seem to go until they're 90 nowadays. And in Congress people, they seem to, just be hauling them in with oxygen tanks.
I think he's 92 years old and he's out there saying, like, we can't do this, that, and the other thing. It's like, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah. There should be a steep flight of stairs at Congress, and you should be able to walk up it unassisted. Anyways, there should be a barbell that you have to lift before you enter the Hall of Congress. But so I think there is a sense of succession, and obviously, God forbid anything, calamitous happens. But there are certain contingencies in place, and the organization is bigger than me in a sense. It also is, I am the organization. I'm not the organization, but the organization is me.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So but it is bigger than me, and a lot of the things that we've built, the connections between the men, that would not stop without me. That would it would not stop if I was not present. And the systems and the practices, because again, when you have a political movement and it's all based on a social media timeline, or it's based on the audience or a viewership of some piece of content, Charlie Kirk, what happened to him was terrible. I wasn't a massive Charlie Kirk fan, but obviously I don't agree with political assassinations generally of any kind. But I think now you can really look, and his legacy is definitely up in the air, right? There was no clear successor.
Right.
Obviously, his wife doesn't seem to be, gaining the same kind of appeal that he did. Without being too critical, I think it's just obvious to say from an unbiased perspective, she does not have the popularity, and she has not been fully accepted as some kind of successor. And I think that's because these movements can be too much based on personalities. Too much based on the commercial framework, and too connected with the digital landscape. I know I sound like a boomer when I say some of these things, but we need to be looking back at...
I mean, it does seem like so often the movement is just like one hot take after another, and you have to be there. And this is what happens when everything is driven by the algorithm and everything's driven by the need for clicks.
I think so many people don't understand just how big of a role that these like secretive, opaque algorithms...
People have no idea.
Especially with the current administration, it is so much more accessible on social media. You have like the vice president going back and forth in rhetoric with streamers, right? This administration has never been more accessible to like the social media landscape, especially because of Elon Musk. I think him buying X
changed everything.
It changed a lot. And I'm not an Elon Musk fan. I think it's good that censorship is lessened. It's just different. And I mean,
it's just not what we had. I mean, in 2014, you could do whatever you wanted. And we're like, you're never going to get that back. And it's something that I still fight against. But the idea that we're going to have a free internet in the way that we all took for granted, and liberals even took for granted, that's just gone forever.
I think we're going to look back, at history at this stage as somewhat of an era or culture defining thing. That this was a culture not run perhaps like it was in maybe parts of the 1800s by the newspapers, but by the algorithms, and that's going to play a big part. And I think there's going to be a sober realization that everybody's going to have after something changes or something gets fixed that, oh, wow, public conscience and democracy, right? Democracy, this great thing, was actually under the control of a very few amount of unelected people, tech bureaucrats. Again, it seems bad to be like, oh, you're just shouting at the new thing. You're just scared about the new thing. But this is one of the fundamental flaws in democracy, is that it's mob rule. And, the founders were very clear that they were not establishing a democracy. They were establishing a republic, which is less democratic. In a republic, your representatives are meant to be the best of you. They're meant to be more inclined and more informed and more able to make these decisions because you, as the layman, should probably focus mostly day to day on running your subsistence farm, right? Your trade, your craft, your being of a good citizen, a family man. Not every person is equipped to be a statesman. That's just a fact of life. Not every man is equipped to have a certain career. That's a fact of life. So there should be a position for that. But when you have a democracy, everybody is trying to be a statesman, and also nobody is capable of being a statesman. So you have this big mob, and the mob is actually, I was reading a John Muir book. We're getting another literary reference, and he said sheep. He was herding sheep in the Yosemite Mountains or something, and he said, the sheep is a very stupid creature because it requires a massive herd just to achieve the intelligence of one dumb individual. And calling sheep democracy, the connections are not made spuriously.
Right.
I think the mob is never smart. Your layman can be smart, but the mob is stupider still. And when you put all of these people, they're not even interacting with each other directly in a mob context. You don't know. The public forum
interacting with AI.
The public forum used to be a physical space.
Yeah, right.
Where you could see it.
Right.
With the things in your head. And now it's in your pocket, right? And it's so easily to be manipulated. And I think PF has been helped by this in a sense. Censorship has actually made us stronger because if you took out any of the legs that the organization stands on social media wise, right? If you totally banned in a way that we couldn't get around on X or TikTok or Instagram or even Telegram, right? We would survive. Now, it'd be a hit, sure, but we would survive. But with a lot of the big public commentators, if you took off their show, right?
It's over.
Exactly. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have shows, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have podcasts. But what I am saying is there needs to be something that exists, not just off the internet.
Yeah, because, the whole point of a show or a podcast is it's supposed to be a means to an end.
Yes.
Like, it's not the end in itself.
Again, the why.
Right, yeah. The point is to take back the country, not to make your clicks go up or make your
Yeah.
ad revenue go up or something.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, if you're doing this for money, you're an idiot. There are easier ways to do this.
The digital space needs to serve the physical.
Right.
The physical is the more important, and all the digital space is ideally it's a reflection. Usually it's a manipulation of the physical space. But if you're operating in the digital space, you always need to be thinking, how is this helping the physical? And the most physical thing is people's lives. So many people, how are you going to make these changes? How are you going to do, when is PF going to make change? I've already changed the lives of people. I've already changed lives for the better. People are living a better life in a different way. They're healthier, they're fitter, they're happier, they're more engaged, they have purpose in their life, and they're making positive change for others. That's success.
Yeah.
That's making a change in the world. The world, politics is all made up of people, right? If there were 0 people in the United States government, it wouldn't be a government, it wouldn't be a thing, it would just be a pile of buildings and documents, right? Obviously, people, the human element is what animates it all from being some, lifeless machine into a mechanism for our dispossession, right? People are politics, and being able to change people's lives has ramifications all the way up the chain. So the digital space must serve the physical.
Well, this brings me to the last point, which is, if you were to define the organization, you said it was change in a word, but I think broadly, I don't think you disagree with me on this, it's to retake the country, essentially.
Yes.
We're not giving up on the country, we're trying to retake it. We're trying to reconquer the United States, as Sam Francis said back in 1994. And how do we get there from where we are now? Is it just we do more of the same, where you're building these networks, you're rebuilding lives, you're giving men these sorts of institutions that they once took for granted? Or do you just do it on a bigger and bigger scale? Or do you think there comes a point where the way you operate has to change, like say 5 years from now, where it operates in a totally different way?
I'm a firm believer in what I call organizing in scale, right? And obviously the goal is to conquer the country. Again, we did it before. We can do it again.
Right.
And
Conquered, not stolen, as
yes,
I believe
absolutely.
some posters said.
Some smart guy wrote that up. So, obviously that's the goal, and we don't just want to have control over the country. It's not about the control. Again, it's the why we want control,
right.
Because we have these certain principles on the way people should live, and we want to do it better. We don't just want the same tyrannical government just directed at it's the wrong people at this time.
Right.
Now we're doing it against people we don't like. It's like, no, we actually want to be better. We don't just want to be bad in a different direction. So, all that being said, that is the goal. And how we do it, I believe in organizing in scale. I think the organization, we do a lot of things. We do a lot of tactics, and we do them a lot of instances. We do them. There's a lot of little benchmark actions and activities that we can chalk up and say, okay, we did this in these new spaces. We built up these networks are now able to do these new tactics. Whether it's anywhere from like grungy graffiti street activism to city council politics. Right. That's the whole spectrum, and everything in between. We're doing, and I think we need to expand the breadth of that, and also expand the number of people engaged in it. Because, again, politics isn't just something that happens in DC. It's not just something that happens, in a press conference, right? Politics is every single day. And so much of the local landscape has been absolutely neglected, and people don't realize that local politics can be way more corrupt than national politics because nobody's paying attention to it, right? So they can do whatever they want. So there's so much power which is able to be attained in the country on a social, on a political, and on an economic basis, but everybody's just trying to sit in the same 3 seats right up top. So we need to organize in scale, where it's largely going to be that we are constantly adapting and evolving and expanding in terms of the multiplicity of what we're doing, and also how many things we're doing with how many people. PF is an engine, right? We produce certain outputs, right? We get inputs of raw manpower and attention and media, coverage, and we turn that into an output in changing people's lives, whether that's jobs, communities, etc. So I think making a bigger machine, right? Doing more things, because, you say 5 years down the line, we have to do some big sudden shift. And I think some organizations have failed because they think that way. And then they get to that shift and they can't do it. Because, we're going to be this type of group, and then we're going to transform into a political party. That's a big change. And if you weren't that way from the start, it's going to be hard to do that. And then that's a big shift, and you're going to lose a lot of people, a lot of capital. But PF right now, I don't think we're going to be an actual political party, mainly for legal reasons. It imposes a lot of harsh things that we are. PF doesn't exist legally.
Oh God, how many times have people said we're going to start a third party? It's like you're going to spend all your time doing ballot access, and then you don't have time to do anything else.
But we're already engaged, again, in a limited scope in conventional politics. And what we have right now is scalable. What we're doing right now, let's say we've done, less than 10 elections, right? On a local basis. That there's nothing stopping us besides manpower, time, and experience from doing 100. And then there's nothing stopping us from doing 1,000. Everything should be scalable. And I think that's a huge thing. People perhaps too much like to emulate certain very situational pathways of mid-century European regimes.
Right, which a totally different context.
Yes.
You do not have
I'm going to be a street movement, and I'm going to be a party, and then I'm going to be dictator.
Every single guy was in some giant war together, and it's like, yeah, that's not the situation we're in.
And whoever's theory it is, you're always going to get to be Hitler first. That's They always think that.
I mean, that's the key to any theory. Whatever the theory is, I get to be in charge at the end of it.
Yeah. So, I think too many people don't realize that we are in a continent-spanning empire, right, of a sense. Not an empire of liberty anymore. It's an empire of something, but not liberty, as Thomas Jefferson said. And it's an immensely complex society. And, I mean, just looking at, I don't want to compare what we're doing to a war. I mean, it's a war of ideas. It's an info war, if you sense Alex Jones. He doesn't like me. He says I'm part of the New World Order. Anyways, he still hasn't talked to me, by the way. He said he was going to have me on the show. Anyways, just calling him out. Anyways, moving on.
Alex.
But we are in an information war. And wars in the modern context are incredibly complex. They're waged on all fronts at all times with tons of different simultaneous tactics, and there's not these great strategic, big staged battles anymore. It's not Alexander the Great. It's a much more granular thing, and you need to have attention on all sides. And I think scalability is what matters.
Yeah. I'm very impressed by talking about systems as opposed to tactics, because I think that's the biggest thing the movement has been missing for a long time.
Absolutely.
Last thing, you're familiar with the concept of an elevator pitch, like the real quick thing that you would say to somebody.
Yes.
Somebody is interested in the group, they're looking at it, they're on the edge, they don't know whether they're going to take the plunge and join. What would you say to them?
I would say that Patriot Front is not something which detracts from your life. It's something which adds to it. That if you are a nationalist and you want to live a better life, which if you are, you should, then it is your obligation to seek out others who can help you do it. That Patriot Front is something which adds purpose to everything you already are doing or should be doing. And where you aren't doing it, we can offer you the means to do it. If you already believe what we believe, then I don't need to convince you on why we as a culture are under threat, why we as a nation exist and, need our own way of life. What I can tell you is that it will make your life better and it will provide you purpose, even if you're already solid. You're one of those guys, I have a job, I have a family, I'm happy where I'm at. Cool. Help the next guy. Be the man that you wish you had to mentor you. There's no excuse for sitting on the sidelines. A lot of guys are, I'm a family guy. I don't have time. Sure, I got a lot of family guys. I got a guy with 6 kids, so I can, I got a few of them I can name off right now. Unless if you have fewer than 6 kids, then you have to join now. Guys with careers. There's guys that own businesses, right? A recent article, right? You can do all these things. There's guys who do all these things, and again, all of these tactics. The organization is not, it's a set of principles and it's a set of ideas. It is not a set of tactics and a set of occupations, right? What you're doing can exist within the organization, and it's better if it does.
Where can people find you?
patriotfront.us. If you go to our webpage, that's our website, patriotfront.us. You go to the social tab, you'll see all of our social media accounts. We're also on Telegram. I would say Telegram is where the most of our easy accessible content is, but that is our website and has links to everything else we do and tons of our other videos and content.
All right. Well, on a movement of talkers, you're a doer, and I really appreciate you coming out here today.
Thanks
so
for having
much.
me.